Okay. Today was Yom HaShoah, and the significance is obvious. This is what we're remembering what happened in the Holocaust, and day of contemplation. Different people deal with it different ways, but obviously it's both a commemoration. Not really commemoration, that's really the wrong word. A remembrance. It's not to forget what happened, of course, what occurred, the people who suffered, people who died. There's no way to really it's a much more powerful thing than simply just a bunch of words can express. On the other hand, historically, it's also a reminder of what goes wrong in history and a warning to the Jewish people about how easily it is to be caught up in a situation that seems impossible at the time, but actually evolves into something a lot worse. I recently learned about somebody who died in Eretz Israel. He was a billionaire, very successful man, started from nothing, had nothing when and he actually came from a family that came from Germany during the 1930s. We've spoken about this many times before. The Havar Agreement, which was a special agreement between the Nazi regime, and what was more or less the Jewish agency or some type of Jewish agency at the time, where they came to an agreement that at that time between 1933 and 1939, the goal of the Nazi Party was to make Germany Judenrein, free of all Jews. It wasn't yet the Holocaust at that point in time. I mean, obviously it was in motion, but no one saw it coming, even though Mein Kampf really did, lead the way to that. But it's one of those impossible things you can't fathom until after it's actually happened. And so when it was suggested that the Jews just leave Germany, there were 160,000 some odd Jews living at the time, and Hitler himself apparently was against it, but the Nazi Party was for it, and they worked together with his agency, well, working together to get the Jews out. They offered, these families and people to get out, and 60,000 or so actually left. And the amazing thing was that somehow it wasn't straightforward. I forget the details, but they actually ended up with most of their property in Eretz Israel, which at that time was called Palestine. And they settled the land, and those families are still here. Now they're naturalized Israelis going back to the 1930s. So over 80 years ago. It's a long time ago. But this person was a child, or he was old, so he could have been easily actually a child in Germany at the time. But he was one of the survivors. 100,000 Jews, German Jews, chose. I mean, maybe some couldn't get out for whatever reason, but they chose to stay behind in Germany, and all those died in the Holocaust. So, in a sense, I hadn't heard. I wondered about these families when I read about this years ago, and to actually hear that this person who had passed away was actually one of the surviving family people who survived that period of time, who actually got out and came to Israel, and he lived here and actually became a billionaire, extremely successful. Other people died instead. A lot more died instead. This week's Parsha is Parsha Shmini. Parsha Shmini is famous because of the episode of Nadav and Avihu. It's Shmini because it's the 8th day of the inauguration ceremony of the Mishkan. We were successful to build the Mishkan, and now it's about to become operational, and we're inaugurating it. It's a very huge celebration, something that we just sort of read and gloss over from year to year. But if you had been there or just understand the impossibility of the mission. It's not about building a shul. It's not about building just another place where Jews can congregate and pray. You can do that almost anywhere and in any way. You can do it in the middle of an airport. You can do it, in a bus station. Obviously, there's levels of kedusha, but nevertheless, building a shul is one thing. But building a Beit Knesset, building something that actually HaKadosh Baruch Hu will descend into, and you witness this. They saw it. The celebration was absolutely unbelievable. But amidst all this, you have the episode of Nadav and Avihu, again, L'Shem Shemaim, who wanted to do a great thing. They weren't looking to upset anybody. They weren't, on the contrary, if anything, they're trying to show their tremendous zeal and love for Hashem and avodas Hashem, that they did this thing. Yet it was such a dramatic mistake that a fire came out from the Kodesh Kodeshim, like kind of lightning bolts, and right out of the movies. Came out and actually went in through their nostrils, because that's where the soul goes into a person, and it burned their soul out from within them. Their bodies remained intact. There was no burn marks anywhere in their bodies, but the soul itself was removed. It was also a major question. Why specifically was that the form of death? I mean, most of the time people get killed for one reason or another from Shemaim. It can happen a number of ways, but that's a very unique, you don't hear about that happening very often, where the soul is actually burned up within the person itself, and what does that to do with in terms of the actual chet that they did. What did they do? They brought an unauthorized fire offering. That's the language, an Zara. That's the language of the Chumash. And for that, what was it? What was that strange fire? Well, it says a fire came down from Shemaim to burn up the sacrifice, and they all saw this, and I mean, absolute miracle to witness a thing like that. Again, it sounds simple, just like words, but to actually understand and witness what was taking place, the miracle that fire came down from Shemaim and actually burned up the sacrifice. It's not a lightning bolt based upon a positive charge and a negative charge, and it just happens at the tree you're standing next to. This is a fire that came down, handcrafted, so to speak, by Hashem to come down and accept this offering as part of the inauguration. And they thought that halachically we have an obligation to participate in that. The miracle is the miracle, but for the most part, when a miracle happens for anybody, you're supposed to do something first to make it happen. For example, if you want to have a miracle parnasa, you buy a lottery ticket. The chances of winning a lottery are astronomical. Getting hit by lightning twice is more common, which is not so common at all. But you provide the means for Kodesh Baruch Hu to do his miracle. You're not saying that by buying this lottery ticket that I think that this is enough of the odds are in my favor, I'm going to win. It's more like if Hashem wants to do the miracle for me, I provided an avenue for him to do it, that the miracle won't be as obvious because Hashem doesn't like to do such obvious miracles, so that people who are watching, they won't get the wrong, they won't get the right idea and do tshuva for the wrong reasons. You have to do tshuva because it's the right thing to do. Obviously, miracles do it, but that's why also the Medrash says that Avram was really meant to die in Ur Kasdim. He went into the fiery furnace. He was supposed to burn to death. The only reason why he survived was because Yaakov had to be born. So since Yaakov had to be born, Avram was saved. Was Avram not a tzaddik? No, he was a complete tzaddik. So why would he be burned? Because if he walks out of that fiery furnace, everyone's going to know it's a miracle, and the God of Avram is the real God. And therefore, they're all going to do tshuva for the wrong reasons. You do tshuva because this is the truth, not because, I'm afraid of being punished, or because it's better than nothing. Let's not get that wrong. But nonetheless, you have to do it because you reason out that this is the true path to go. And it says that day that Avram walked out of the furnace unscathed, right? Only the ropes that were tying him were burned. And as a result of that, a lot of people did tshuva that day because they saw the miracle. And Hashem, he doesn't want to take away our bechir unless he really has to. That's, again, going back to the plague. That's the reason why, the ninth plague of darkness killed 4/5 of the Jewish population, 12 million Jews, because the 10th plague was a complete miracle with no angels involved. So everybody knew, including Paro, that this was God doing it. So there was no bechir anymore, no free will by the 10th plague. So you couldn't choose to do the right thing by the 10th plague. You had to already have chosen it by the 8th plague. And if you didn't, you couldn't stick around for the 10th plague. So therefore, the 9th plague was the one that God took away all those people who had yet to make the decision to go with him. So this is an ongoing, concept all through creation. And you in order to if you want a miracle to happen for you, you have to do something to at least provide the basis, some kind of base for the miracle to attach itself to. And also, bracha works that way. That's the way bracha works. Bracha needs something to be attached to. That's why Yitzchak sent out Esav to go do the mitzvah of kibbud of Avim by hunting for him and bringing back dinner. Order in service. He said, Esav would go pick it up. He would have been successful. And so why did Yitzchak not know who Esav was? He knew exactly who Esav was. He knew. You can't not know. Rivka knew, so obviously if Rivka knew, they must have talked about it at some point in time over dinner, right? And what Esav was doing, and the neighbors had to talk about. Esav was not covering it up that much. Yitzchak could not be the only one in the world not to know the truth. So then why was he doing this? Because he knew that Esav had the potential to be David HaMelech. He was red and ruddy and blood in his hands. He was supposed to be the fourth forefather, just like Leah was the fourth, foremother, right? That Esav was supposed to be her husband, and he was supposed to be just like Yaakov, a twin. But he blew it, and he lost it. So Yaakov had to absorb Esav into him and take it over, but Esav had that potential, and Yitzchak knew that. But the problem was there was no place for the brucha to be chal, to attach itself to. So therefore, Yitzchak sent Esav out to do a mitzvah to create a little teensy base for the miracle to attach itself to, so that the brucha could come down that he's going to give to him, right, to him, attach itself to the good that he did, and that way the bracha could spread to the rest of his body and cause Esav to become a tzaddik in the end. That was the plan, and the Kosh Baruch Hu obviously didn't want that, but that was the idea. So therefore, Nadav and Avihu thought, well, here's the fire from Shemaim, but we're supposed to contribute too. So let's be the ones to bring that fire. But it wasn't what was supposed to happen. It was a mistake, and they should have first consulted with Moshe and Aaron, but they didn't do that either, because the Gemara says they didn't have the ultimate respect for them. They didn't, they felt big enough on their own. And in fact, the Gemara gives several reasons why they actually die. One reason is because they did this act, which is the unauthorized fire, and part of the problem was that they did it without consulting with Moshe, which is basically tantamount to teaching a halacha in the presence of your Rebbe, which you're not supposed to do, right? With a certain, if your Rebbe is in a certain vicinity, you're not supposed to paskin halacha. You're not supposed to decide halacha for yourself. You have to, as a matter of respect, even if you know the answer, you should ask the Rebbe first. And if he's not in that vicinity, then you can't make the decision. But they were in the proximity of Moshe and Aaron, and they made this decision in themselves. And it's such a severe thing because Judaism depends upon that transmission process. It's so severe that the Beis Din can't kill you for it, but Shemayim will. And so that was another reason why. Some say it was because it was such a celebration. The halach of not drinking while doing the avoda had not yet been given. It's given in this week's parsha. That's one of the reasons why that they feel that maybe Nadav, or they think the Medrash says that Nadav and Avihu may have actually imbibed some wine, not as drunkards, but because they were celebrating, and wine is a celebrated. We make kiddush with it and bris milah with it. Lots of times we use wine for it. It's a very kaddish thing, wine, arba kostos, right? And they drank some wine, and so therefore that was part of the problem. They lost maybe a little perspective because of it, and so therefore the halach of not drinking wine during the avoda comes right after in this week's parsha. That's one of the reasons why they said as well. Another explanation: you go back to Parashat Mishpatim. In Parashat Mishpatim, it mentions at the end of the parsha when they're going up the mountain. They say, and the Jewish people say Nasa v'nishma. It says that Hashem did not stretch out his hand against his what's the word? It's Sili, but like there's nobles, right? And Rashi explains, Medrash again, that the nobles refer to Nadav and Avihu because when they got to the point where they could see the Shechina, they should have looked away, and they didn't. They peeked at the Shechina and they were chayiv misa, but Hashem didn't want to punish them then because that would have ruined the whole thing. There's our Sinai, the giving of Torah, so therefore he held off into this week's parsha. All these reasons for why Nadav and Avihu were supposed to die, but make no mistake about it though, they're not evil people by any stretch of the imagination. On the contrary, in Shar HaGilgulim, he mentions that their souls are so powerful that anybody who got their souls after they died, and usually as an Ibor, if you recall, maybe, that there are different types of reincarnation. There's the main type of reincarnation is when a person dies and comes back, same soul, in another body. That's the main type of reincarnation. But there's another kind of reincarnation where you don't have to die first, where while you're living, you can get you can have up to 4 souls in your body at one time, up to 4 souls. If you're feeling a little crowded, it might be for that reason, right? So that Nadav Avihu count as 1 soul. So when Pinchas got Nadav Avihu, he became Eliyahu Navi. He became the prophet Eliyahu. Shmuel got their souls later on, got it from Pinchas and to Shmuel, basically. So then he became a prophet as well, right? And this is how powerful their souls are. Very holy. Their story is very short-lived in this week's parsha, but in Kabbalah they're quite a long story, and that's why it says in the Torah that everybody mourned the sreifa, because their souls were burned out of them. a sreifa. We just had one yesterday here in Israel. I'm sure most people saw the news or people living here. A major fire that broke out in the forest by Beit Shemesh and started to spread towards Beit Meir, and took a lot of firefighters to put it out, and smoke all over the place. It's called a sreifa. That's called a fire, right? And there's it's also called a sreifa, and even the Holocaust at times has been called a sreifa because of the terrible burning, so to speak, of all the Jews that took place. And a lot of times it really actually was burning itself, right? But this is a concept, and the Jewish people would not have mourned. They wouldn't have mourned the death of Nadav and Avihu if they were as arrogant as the Gemara seems to portray them sometimes. Or another reason, I forgot one of the reasons too, because they weren't married yet. And one of the reasons they weren't married yet is big mitzvah to get married and big mitzvah to have children. You have to do this as soon as luckily possible, right? And they held off because they didn't feel any woman that they had met so far was good enough to marry them. So these are all the reasons given, but the real reason seems to be, and Rashi brings it down, in this week's parsha, and they don't resolve these things, not in the level of the Medrash. The Medrash has no problem throwing out different answers and different ideas, some of which seem to contradict one another, and this just walk away, just let it go. So you have all these reasons, why they might have died, but the real reason, you can't even call it the real reason because other reasons are also real reasons, but maybe a main reason, a big reason was because of Arna Cohen, their father. Their father was the main reason why they died. That's what it seems that Rashi brings it down. That's what it says. Arna Cohen caused the death of Nadav and Avihu. And the truth is, as Rashi points out, as the Medrash points out, as even the Gemara points out, that really all four of Aaron's sons were supposed to die. Maybe this week's parsha at some point in time, but they're supposed to die, including Elazar and Itamar. No sons left to carry on. Well, Pinchas was eventually become a Kohen, but that's everybody. The whole kahuna, unless he gets married, have more children after that, the whole kahuna, wiped away, almost just like that. Why? Arna Cohen. You think of Arna Cohen, you think about how, Rodef Shalom. He's mentioned in the Mishnah as being Rodef Shalom. He pursues peace and he makes peace. He bridges the gap between husbands and wives and between partners and friends and everybody. He's walking around making shalom for everybody. Tzaddik, they don't get more righteous than that. Moser Nefesh, self-sacrificing, he's the epitome of it, right? And yet, Rashi brings down, and it's known, that when Arna Cohen participated in the golden calf, he got involved in the golden calf. As a result of that, all four sons were meant to die as a punishment. Well, as a consequence, at least, of what he did. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, because not only is that a remarkable thing, but if ever there was an example of the road to hell being paved with good intention, this is it. Because Aaron had no desire whatsoever to be involved in any idol worship whatsoever. He had no desire to give the wrong impression about anything. He was doing it completely l'shem shemayim. What does it mean, l'shem shemayim? Well, he saw that when Hur, his nephew, Miriam's son, tried to stop the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, and whoever joined up with them, right? He saw they killed him. That's what the Gemara says. The Medrash says, right? They saw he killed them. Aaron saw, right? So when he saw that the Hur died in the process, they murdered him at Har Sinai to do this golden calf. Incredible. Right, and he saw that they killed, him. So they said, "What's the point of my trying to stop? They're going to kill me too." Oh, but if that's the case, he's just saving himself. No, he wasn't worried about dying. In fact, the Arizal says it cost him big time that he didn't die. It was better off if he had died. Why? Because if you look at the name Aharon, it has in it Hey Resh Nun, Haran. Who's Haran? Haran was the brother of Avram Avinu. And the story of Haran is that, Avram was given a choice by Nimrod, our God or your God? Which is it? And if you choose our God, you walk away. You live a nice long life. We'll leave you alone. You choose your God, you're going to have to die into this fight, walk in this fiery furnace, and we're going to burn you to death. So, Haran was next in line. He's going, what do I do? What do I do? Who do I choose? What do I choose? I don't know. I'm not die. I want to die. So I'll tell you what. Let me see what happens to my brother. If he comes at us okay, then I'll go with him. If he doesn't, no, I'll go with Nimrod instead. So he waited. So Avram came out of the fiery furnace. Haran says, "Oh, we see that God is real. God's true. He protected my brother. Let me go jump into the fiery furnace too." And he did. He burned to death. He burned to death. Why? Because the rule is you're not supposed to go into a situation of danger and expect a miracle. You can't rely upon a miracle. Ein simchan al nisim. You can't rely upon a miracle. Why, says the Gemara? Because either the miracle won't happen for you, in which case you're suicidal, or two, it may happen to you and you lose reward in the world to come because it's going to come off your cheshbon. Miracles don't come for free. So you can't do it. If you find yourself in a situation that you didn't get to because of negligence and you need a miracle, okay. You didn't plan for it, so you're fine. That's why Daniel was told by Hashem to tell Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael that, listen, if you want to go, if Nebuchadnezzar is threatening you, and he's going to put you into a cauldron, a fiery cauldron to kill you if you don't turn away from your God, you should know if you go in, fine, but don't expect a miracle. Don't expect what happened to Avram to happen for you. You go in, knowing you're probably going to die. You are going to die. So he did anyhow. But the miracle happened anyhow. Why? Because since they didn't go in expecting the miracle, they wanted to sanctify the name of Hashem, the Da'al Kodesh Hashem. So therefore, the miracle happened for them. So you can't do things, take unnecessary risks based upon the idea. You can take risks. People take risks all the time, but it's on your cheshbon. You take a risk, something happens to you, that's your cheshbon. But you can't take a risk and hope that a miracle will happen to save you from some situation. That's what it's talking about. But as a result of that, Haran, first of all, he unsanctified them. He didn't sanctify. He profaned the name of God, because by him dying, it didn't make God look good, right? But that was on his cheshbon. And second of all, he killed himself. It's called suicide, as the Rambam points out. The person dies al kiddush Hashem, but they don't have to. They could get out. They could get away. They don't say I could escape, but I'm going to stick around just so I can die and make my point. Normally, that's not the case in most situations. It's called suicide, chai benafsho, as a lashon of the Rambam. So that therefore he had to rectify that. So he came back. He reincarnated as Aaron Cohen, and by dying like Hur did here at Mount Sinai, instead of being involved in the golden calf, so then he would have rectified Haran and himself as a result of that, and that would have been the end of that. He would have died. Fine, the world would have missed him. The world would have lost out, but he would have been seventh heaven because of it. So he lost out on that tikkun because he didn't die. So not protect. But did he know? No, he didn't know this. So you could easily make that mistake. But it's more to do with the fact that he probably would have. He would have died to avoid being. Moshe says, what did they do to compel you to get involved? Like Moshe had no chashash, no suspicion whatsoever that Aaron was not involved for the wrong reasons. He was not even a havamina, like a pre-thought, a forethought that Aaron was mistaken in any way about what he was doing. He knew what he was doing and why he was doing it, all for the right reasons. And yet Moshe still asked the question, but how did you come to this faulty cheshbon in the end? So the Gemara answers. The Gemara explains. He wasn't afraid to die. Hur died. He's a hero. And because he died the way he did, his mention is Betzalel ben what was his father's name again? And then Ben Hur, right? Hur is mentioned in the building of the Mishkan because of the fact that he died like this, so therefore he's connected to the Mishkan. He has this status in Jewish history in the Torah because of this. But who was it? Uri, thank you. Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur, right? So this, that's Hur's tribute for having been Moshe Nefesh. So the but Aaron, right? He wasn't worried about having any type of heroic status. On the contrary, he was worried about only the people. Why? Because there was a halacha that if a generation kills, like Zechariah, he died, the whole generation suffered because if the generation kills the Kohen Gadol in the temple, in the Beis Hamikdash, there's no atonement for the generation. You can't fix it. Nothing can be done. Certain mistakes in life can't be rectified. The Gemara brings down a case. What happens if a woman, her husband goes to war, and witnesses come back and say he died? They saw him. They don't know where he is. They can't find the body, but they pretty sure they saw him get shot and he dropped dead, and they couldn't find the body. And they testified before a Beis Din, and the Beis Din says, yes, we accept that testimony. We will say that your husband has died, and therefore you are now free to marry somebody else. And she goes ahead and marries somebody else, and they have a child, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, the first husband shows up saying, I was shot, yes, but I recovered and I came back home. Here I am. Let's continue where we left off. And she's already married to somebody else. So retroactively, right, she's still married to her husband. So the second marriage, even though it was halakhically sanctioned, she did everything right. But the reality is that child's still a mamzer because it was born to another man while she's still married to the first husband. How could such a terrible consequence? Okay, that's a different discussion, part of this discussion, but not for the moment. Just a way of what the Gemara calls certain mistakes that can't be rectified. There are some things in this world that you can apologize for. There are some things in this world you can make amends for. You steal something, you can pay it back, right? You can make reparation for some things, but something cannot be fixed up. Not in this world, not by man. And this is an aspect, and this is the killing a Kohen Gadol in the Beis Hamikdash was one such thing. And Aaron HaKohen, being Rodiv Shalom, loving people more than he loves himself, could not accept the fact that this generation would have no way to atone for itself. So therefore, he avoided death that he needed to go through to save everybody else from not being able to atone for themselves. So you'll say, but it's not the Beis Hamikdash. It's Mount Sinai. But the whole time that Hashem was over the mountain, over the mountain, that Har Sinai had the status of the temple. And he had the status of the Kohen Gadol. So for all intents and purposes, he was in fact the Kohen Gadol in the Beis Hamikdash, and if they killed him, that would have been that. So therefore he did all this for the right reasons. I mean, he was doing this to save the people. And yet, Chayiv Misa, all four sons. So why didn't all four die? So Rashi brings down, he explains, because Moshe was mispala. Moshe, their uncle, he davened really hard for them, and he was able to at least save two. And as a result of that, two survived, Elazar and Itamar, but not Nadavihu. Maybe perhaps now the other reasons come in. How do you decide who's going to die and who's going to survive? So maybe because they had all these other cheshbonos, all these other reasons to die, so Hashem said, well, you add them all together, Elazar and Itamar didn't have all those things that they had. So therefore, as a result of that, they were spared and these were not. But it's an absolute remarkable thing. I mean, what are you supposed to learn from this? Aside from the fact that you can't tamper with halacha. You can't tamper with a situation as much as it hurts to watch certain things happen and you feel the need to go do something about it. That the halacha is there to protect us, because ultimately speaking, this is what God says to Eov, you don't know the whole story. You don't know the whole story. You don't know everything from beginning until the end to be able to make such a decision like that. The reason why, because you could argue based upon that, so how can we even paskin halacha? Even a gadol ador, a navi, a prophet's a different story, because at least with a prophet, Kodesh Baruch Hu is telling that prophet what to say, what to do. So it's Hashem making the decision. The prophet is just the mouthpiece for what Hashem wants. But so the Gemara says a Talmid Chacham is better than a Navi, right? But nevertheless, a Talmid Chacham is making a decision based upon all his learning. I mean, Rav Moshe Paskin decided halacha by memory because he knew everything off by heart, everything there was to know that was relevant to the halacha. And there were a few times he had to isolate himself in certain situations where there was a halacha that was not yet decided and it was complicated. And he worked like very hard to find a heter in certain situations that seem, to most rabbis not doesn't exist, and he often found them. But it took a lot of learning. But that's not prophecy. What if there's bigger things going on? There's a famous story of Moshe about how someone came to him with a shaila, and actually two stories. One story is about how someone came to him with a shaila, and he paskin. He made the decision, and this person said, I beg the gadol's, slicha, but if I'm not mistaken, the Shulchan Aruch says not like that. So Moshe says, I'll tell you what, you go home, check it out. If it's like you say, let me know, because I often make decisions by memory, and I need to know if my memory's still reliable. So you go check it out, and then get back to me. Sure enough, the guy went home, and the halacha was like Reb Moshe, not like him. And Reb Moshe knew that. Otherwise, he would have gone on the spot. He wouldn't embarrass the person. So he told the person to check out when he gets home, and the comfort and the privacy of his own home. But Reb Moshe knew he was right, and he knew by memory. And this person obviously didn't have the same access to memory as Reb Moshe did. But another story, very famous story. I think I saw this in the Jewish Observer a long, long time ago, and it's been printed elsewhere as well. And the story was how Moshe passed in halacha in one situation, and as the guy was leaving, it went home. He all of a sudden realized he left out a very important detail, and he called Reb Moshe to say, I'm sorry, but I think I left out an important detail that probably has an impact on the halacha. So he says, what is it? So he told him halacha, and Reb Moshe laughed. He said, it's funny because the halacha I gave you takes into account that detail that you just brought up right now. I didn't know it at the time, but somehow it worked because that's what a gadol does. That's what a gadol is. We have also siyata d'shmaya. Everyone has siyata d'shmaya, but a gadol, a leader of the Jewish people, a Torah leader of the Jewish people, has tremendous help to be able to accomplish so much more than is naturally and humanly possible. So that's why they can do that. That's why they can make decisions and that's what the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says. Make your will like His will, so that His will be like your will. Meaning that's what it means to be a tzaddik. It means to be a gadol. You're not a gadol in Torah because you know a lot of Torah. You should know there's lots of people in the Jewish world who know tons and tons of Torah, but they don't have the humility. They don't have that devotion to Kosh Baruch Hu, where you can rest assured that they're going to get extra heavenly help to make decisions for the future that they can't possibly make without being a prophet. And then, in fact, the Marsha says this. The Marsha in Gittin mentions this idea about how when Rav Yochanan he was able to escape. He was inside the old city. The Romans had sieged the old city, and he knew it was going to end in disaster for the Jewish people. So why didn't they just make peace? Because the Baronim, the rebels, the Jewish rebels had burned the wheat, and they did all kinds of terrible things. They weren't religious at all, and they wanted to fight the Romans. It was suicidal, but they wanted to do it, and it did end in disaster for most of them. So Rabbi Yochanan, he escaped to get out. He had the whole trick where he had pretend to be dead, and they snuck him out. And the Gemara the stories in the Gemara and Gittin on Nun Vav Amud Aleph at the bottom of the next page. And anyhow, he gets out to Vespasian, and there's a whole story there. And because he helps Vespasian, to put on his boots and take them off, but again, there's a story behind it too, that he gets 3 wishes. And he doesn't ask for Jerusalem to be saved. He doesn't make the request. The Gemara wants to know why. So one answer is because of the fact that he thought it would be asking for too much. And the expression is tefasta ruba lo tefasta, right? If you ask for too much, you get nothing. So he tempered his requests to make sure he'd get what he was going to ask for. The other is Rabbi Kiva, who brings a pasuk from Yeshaya, but how Hashem turns the chachma of the chachamim backwards. In other words, he should have and didn't because Hashem tampered with his thinking. And you read that Gemara, it's very disturbing at first because what does that mean? We're relying upon these are your chosen people who you teach us through Hashem. And all of a sudden we're finding out that he plays games with their minds and misdirects us as a result of it. So the Rashi says nothing, Tosfos says nothing. They're not bothered by it at all. But the Marsha says something. It's a very important thing that he says. Everything he says is important, but this is very important to the sugya at this point in time. And that is, he says that the Gedolei Ador, the leaders of the generation, they get their heavenly help based upon the merits of the people. In other words, they in their own right are worthy of tremendous heavenly help, but they don't always get it because there's historic demands. We see this in the Parashat to do with the golden calf itself, with Moshe Rabbeinu. Where Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lech Haret, go down from here. The people you brought out, the Erev Rav, they're destroying the place down below. So go down. And Lech Haret, the Medrash says, doesn't mean just go down from the mountain. It means go down from your greatness. Because the only reason why I made you this, you're a great person. I mean, your own right. Moshe Rabbeinu, there's no one like you. From Moshe to Moshe, no Moshe like Moshe. You're unbelievable, but you're not this great. This extra greatness that you have, I gave to you because of the nation. They need that from you. So therefore, I gave it to you. But if they're not going to listen to you and you can't lead them, you don't need it either. It wasn't just a free gift. So you see how the Gedolim, the leaders of the generation, they get this extra help because of the nation. If the nation's not there, not worthy of it, then the Gadol Ador also can be misdirected. But he did nothing wrong. He's not going to be punished for it. He's not held responsible. He's just not the vehicle to give this information that would save our lives, because we're not worthy of being saved as a result of that. And they have to know that. Because very often people choose their poskim, they choose the people to decide halacha for them based upon their whims, based upon what they want to hear. So, I mean, I used to go this all the time, and someone would, say, well, "Who says it's halacha to make aliyah today? Who says you have to do it?" And they go ask a shaila. And if you ask one Rav who's known to answer, you don't have to go. That's what they're going to hear, and they'll say, "See, I got a psach halacha." But that may not be to their advantage. You should know there are many people who consulted with Rabbanim in World War II, in advance of the Holocaust. Should I leave? Should I pack up my family and go? And they were told no. And of course, later on, they would have, wished that they were told yes. But there was a Gazar Din. There was already a Gezerah, a decree in Shemayim. But until the Gezerah, right, the story that we mentioned before in the past, also written up in books about somebody who was living in Hamburg. I think he was in real estate, a frum guy, and living in Hamburg in real estate. He'd done very well for himself, and every year they invited an elderly gentleman to their Pesach Seder who had lost his wife years ago, and he was their guest, and he always liked to make it seem like he didn't need to come so badly, but he always showed up. And one year in 1938, I don't think it was before. I think it was before Kristallnacht. I don't know for sure or not, but it was around that time. Anti-Semitism was already quite bad, and he was invited over, and sure enough, he was late again. And they thought, okay, this is not abnormal for him. He's done this before in the past, but they kept waiting, and he didn't show up at all. So they decided to go check on him because it's obviously the situation in the world in Hamburg at that time was very dangerous. So they felt it was important to go check on him. He was an old man. What could happen to an older man? He's not a young guy in the street. And they go check on him, and he's not at home. They can't find him anywhere. No one seems to know where he is. They don't see him in the streets. So as a last-ditch effort, they check at the local jail cell. And they go there, and they find him sitting in a cell, all beaten up. And they say, "What happened to you? What happened to you?" Right? And he says, "I was on my way to your house. And all of a sudden, these Germans started picking on me. Right? And eventually they just beat me to a pulp and they threw me in jail like this. And this is where I am." And this man, according to the story, I'm not making this up, right? This man, turns to his wife, I don't know, on the spot, it was already Yantiv that night, right? It turns to his wife and says, "If this is what they're doing to elderly people right now, imagine what they're going to be doing to people like you and I soon." So after the second day Yantiv, because it was Chutz La'aretz, they had 2-day Yantiv, right? The second day Yantiv, he packed up whatever he could without looking obvious and his family, and they went to America and survived the war. He got out. And there are stories like that, and trains that got up, and people were able to escape, but 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. They just couldn't get out. It was different than today. There was no Eretz Israel per se. There was, and there was Palestine. There were Jews. There was a yishuv here, and all going back to 1800s. It was underdeveloped, and travel was very difficult in those days. I mean, you'd be horse and buggy for miles and miles, and food and anti-Semitism and danger along the way. It wasn't simple to pick, to uproot your family and leave, but some people did. They saw, Ezu Chacham. The Gemara says, "Who's a Chacham? A Roisa Noah." Someone who sees what's being born, someone who sees the situation today and projects in the future. This person who left Hamburg, he's a chacham, right? Other people saw writing on the wall, but not understanding what the writing said, or hoping. That's a mistake that we're doing today. We're doing it today. This situation in the world is very bad, and we have no proof. We have no proof that the situation cannot become as bad as it was in Europe. No proof. What is the proof? What is the pasuk? What is the psach halacha? What is the constitution? What is it that we can say? Well, based upon this, there's no prophet who's told us, don't worry, it's going to be okay in North America. It's going to be okay in Europe. No one's telling us that. We're making the decision for ourselves. What about our Rabbanim? Well, we already saw from the Marsha how they can tell us what we need to hear based upon what we're willing to hear. So what are we relying upon? Hope. Hope is a good thing if you're hoping for the right thing. But if you're hoping for the wrong thing, it's a dangerous thing. Yeah. And consequences result. Now, there's a bigger picture. There's a bigger picture. It goes back to the beginning. And this is what Hashem was basically telling Eov. He was telling Eov, he wasn't saying to Eov, listen, buddy, mind your own business. Even to Chizkiah doesn't get married because he wants to avoid the mitzvah of having children. As long as he's not married, there's no mitzvah to have children. There's a mitzvah of children, there's a mitzvah to get married. So Yeshai the prophet comes to Chiz and says, why haven't you got married yet? You haven't, he says, because I had a prophecy. The prophecy was that I'm going to have a son called Menashe who's going to turn this country back to idol worship after I spent all this time and energy and effort to make it not idol worship. And it's going to be wiped away in just one generation? I can't stand for that. No. So Yeshai says to Chizkiah, what business do you have with Kavshid Rahmana? What business do you have with the mysteries of God, of creation? If you do your best to fulfill the halacha the way the halacha is meant to be fulfilled, and you do the best you can to raise your child to walk in the ways of Hashem, and he still goes off the derech, and he still becomes an idol worshiper and turns the whole country to idol worship for 22 years, you've done your job. You don't understand it? Oh, okay, that's understandable. It hurts you? Also understandable. You can't fathom it? Who can? Besides Hashem. And those he tells secrets to. He wasn't saying to Chizkiah, mind your own business. Or Moshe Beidu says to Kush Baruch Hu, this is Torah and this is the reward. Rabbi Akiva becomes a Baal Tshuva at the age of 40 and devotes himself to Torah and the Jewish people for 80 years. And then the last year of his life, he's tortured to death. That's the reward for Torah. And Hashem says, be quiet. This is what I plan to do. But he's not saying be quiet, like mind you. He's not getting angry at Moshe Benu. The only time he gets upset is when Moshe questions the increased slavery at the end of Parshas Shmos. But even that's got explanations to it. But here he understands Moshe's taina. But he says to Moshe what he says to Eov, what he says to Chizkiah. There's a bigger picture. Things have to happen. And they have to happen a certain way. And they're going to happen that way, right? Whether you try to, you second guess God and third guess God and fourth guess God, you may second guess God 15 times, but you're not going to outsmart him because he already knows where you're going to end up. You may think, I got this last one in here. No, you didn't. He knew you were going to do it in the first place before he even made a decision to do that. He knew Chizki was going to do this before he did. He knew that Moshe was going to question. He knows the whole thing. And yet he never strays from the purpose of creation. Never. has a surprise. It's all part and parcel. So, when you get right down to it, then then what are we doing? We're trying the best to make things work out properly. We have the best of intentions, and somehow still it can result in the death of children, God forbid. Right? So what are we doing? Well, we're doing what we're supposed to do. Our job. Our job is to do what we have to do. That's why God gave us a Torah. That's why he gave us halakha. The world doesn't know. The world's just like freestyling. They're just, winging it and doing a terrible job. I mean, it's amazing we're still here at all. And in fact, it's a miracle we're still here at all. Because the way that we live in this world and we do things, insane. So much insanity in the world. And we're still here because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is performing a miracle to keep us alive in time of history. The same way we should have been wiped away in Mitzrayim, but Hashem did miracles to save us there as well. But we have this halach, we have what we're supposed to do, right? And we do what we do the best way we can. And whatever happens after that, either you're blessed to have a positive result or you're not. Meaning either it works out the way you want it to or it doesn't. And whether it does or not, right, that's part of some huge master plan that goes way back before you were born and continues on way after you die. And you're part of it. But the question is, in the midst of all of that, what do I do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu he understood that Aaron Cohen meant well. He knew where he was coming from. He knew that's why he's not held responsible. He's still Kohen Gadol. If he was pasul, if he was no longer good for the job, Hashem would have said, he's not good anymore. Aaron thought that about himself. He himself thought, maybe I blew it and I should be part of this. But Hashem said, no, because you really did me. But what about these consequences? Two sons being, bigger things going on, bigger things. But at least you stuck within the parameters of what you had to do. And there are consequences. This poor woman who got married twice, thinking that she was free, scot-free, and halakha and all that. There's a shkacha pratis going on there. There are things, maybe she made some mistake, maybe she didn't. The husband, the son, the child, what about the child's a mamzer? What did he do? What did she do? They're just born that way. Well, the Rizal says, for example, in their previous lifetime, they caused the, there's things going on. Lots of things going on. We're so short-sighted. We're so narrow-minded. We have tunnel vision. We think that reality is only as big as we see, even though every day we're seeing more things and expanding our thought process and expanding our view. We're constantly being shown the opposite, yet we still act like that's the case. And that's what this parsha says, and that's what the Shoah tells us, the Crusades and the pogroms. There's a historical process going. It's difficult. I can't minimize it. I can't say, you can brush it off. No, it's all for the good. It is, but you can't really say that. We have Hilchos Avelus. We have mourning. We have things that we're supposed to, they mourned the death of Nadav and Avihu. They mourned the death of Aaron Cohen. They mourned the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. They mourned. We have mourning, right? It's one of the reasons why I call Hilchos Smechos too. Right? It's all one of the halachas of a mourning is also called Hilchos Smechos, which like from the word Simcha. Sorry, like Sagi Nahar, we talk about the negative in the pot. No, but it's also a way of saying in reminding us that despite the fact that we have these sad things happening and we have to be impacted by them and allow them to direct us and guide us in life, to be a mensch, to be godly, we have to always keep in our mind that there's this huge, massive, big picture that goes way beyond, and everything is happening as HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to happen. One day in the future, maybe we'll be zeicher to understand how it all worked out and fit together, and we probably will be, B'ezras Hashem. That's the promise they make to us. But in the meantime, we got to stick to halacha, do what we have to do, the way it has to be done, right? Don't freestyle. Somebody told me about some halacha during Pesach that they were mekulin. They were not mekulin over here in Israel, but they were mekulin because why? Back in America, that's the way they did it, and then this, only that the chumer, the rabbi, and so he was mekel. But you know something? It's not necessarily true because manufacturers, change their way of doing things from one country to another. different laws, different rules, different sources, different factories. There are differences, and we don't know them all. And that's why we have mashgichim to check those things out. So you might think that no, but there's a halacha, there's a derech. Ask a shaila before you make the decision for yourself. Otherwise, you might make a terrible mistake in the process, even though it looks like it's completely kosher. No, we don't second guess a kosher Baruch Hu. We let him take care of the details. And if we're blessed to have a great result, oh, you have to revel in it and thank a kosher Baruch Hu, for it. If God forbid it works into a negative situation, at least know that you did what you're supposed to do and deal with it the best way you possibly can. So to reach such levels, that's the direction we're going. This is Sfira Omer. Right, Rabbi Kiva students, 24,000 died until Lag BaOmer. But Lag BaOmer is Kabbalah. It's a window to a higher level reality. The first 32 days, of course, the Gematria of 32, the Gematria of Lev, heart. Then comes Lag BaOmer, and then you have 17 days, the Gematria of Tov. The whole point is to develop a Lev Tov, to receive Torah in a Lev Tov. That's how you get one. That's how you build it. And B'ezras Hashem, we'll talk about that a bit more in the future. Have a good Shabbos.